The melody lingered in the dusty air of Willow Creek, hauntingly beautiful and utterly forbidden. Bridget Grayson's voice soared above the weathered buildings of the small frontier town, unaware that the very notes that brought her solace would soon lead to her exile. The year was 1875, and in this corner of Wyoming territory, a woman with a voice that could make angels weep was considered nothing short of a witch. Bridget had always known she was different. At 22, most girls her age were already married with children on their hips, but she had dreams as vast as the western sky. Her father, the town's blacksmith, had encouraged her gift until his passing 3 winters ago. Now, it was just her and her stepmother, a woman who viewed Bridget's singing as a distraction from proper duties. "You'll never find a husband caterwauling like some wild creature," her stepmother would scold, pinching her lips together in that way that made Bridget want to sing even louder. But today, Bridget couldn't contain herself. The spring air was sweet with promise, and as she gathered water from the creek, the melody poured from her unbidden. She didn't notice Reverend Parsons approaching until his shadow fell across her. "Miss Grayson," his voice was cold as mountain snow. "The council meeting tonight will address your disturbances." Bridget clutched her water bucket tighter. "Disturbances, Reverend? I was only singing." "That's precisely the problem. Your voice carries strange influences. Mrs. Miller's cow dried up last week after hearing you." "The Thompsons' youngest has been speaking nonsense. People talk, Miss Grayson." Fear gripped Bridget's heart. She knew what happened in small towns when people talked. Just last autumn, old Miss Jenkins had been driven out for allegedly communicating with spirits. In truth, the woman had merely suffered from rheumatism that made her bones crack loudly in the quiet of night. That evening, Bridget stood before the town council, 12 stern faces illuminated by lantern light in the small meeting hall. "We've had complaints," Mayor Higgins began, not meeting her eyes. "Disturbing incidents." "I don't understand," Bridget said, though she did. This was about fear, about difference, about a woman who didn't fit the narrow confines of their expectations. Mrs. Winters, the midwife, spoke up. "That voice isn't natural, girl. It's bewitching. Young men neglect their duties to hear it. My own son walked straight into a post yesterday, so entranced he was by your singing." One by one, the accusations mounted. Her voice caused headaches. It made livestock nervous. It was too loud, too haunting, too everything. "I'm simply singing," Bridget protested, her voice breaking. "There's no harm in music." "There is when it comes with your strange ways," Reverend Parsons countered. "A proper woman knows her place, keeps her voice modest and low." The verdict came swiftly. Bridget Grayson had 3 days to leave Willow Creek or face more severe consequences. They called it mercy. She called it cruelty dressed in righteousness. That night, Bridget wept until no more tears would come. She packed her meager belongings, her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, 3 dresses, and the small leather-bound book of songs her father had gifted her on her 16th birthday. Everything she owned fit into one trunk and a carpet bag. Her stepmother watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and something that might have been regret. "You brought this on yourself," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "By singing?" Bridget asked, folding her shawl carefully. "Is that truly such a sin?" "By being different. This world doesn't reward different, girl, especially not in women." The next morning, Bridget sold what little else she owned to purchase passage on the stagecoach heading west. 3 days was too long to endure the whispers, the crossed streets, the mothers pulling their children away from her as if her voice might infect them with some terrible malady. As the stagecoach rumbled away from Willow Creek, Bridget didn't look back. The town had never truly been her home, not since her father died. She swallowed the melodies that rose in her throat, determined to keep them locked inside until she found somewhere her voice wouldn't be feared. 200 miles northwest, Kale Walker adjusted his hat against the relentless Montana sun. At 30, he had spent half his life herding cattle across the frontier, and the work had etched itself into every line of his weathered face. He was respected among the cowboys of the Silver Horn Ranch, known for his steady hand and quiet demeanor. "Kale," the foreman's voice carried across the prairie. "Got a telegram from Lewiston. Need you to escort the supply wagon back. Injun's been spotted near the pass." Kale nodded, though the task wasn't one he relished. The 2-day journey to town meant sleeping on hard ground and eating beans straight from the can. But orders were orders, and the ranch needed those supplies. "When do I leave?" he asked, already mentally preparing for the journey. "First light tomorrow. Take Jenkins with you. He's green, but he's quick with a rifle if trouble comes." The next morning, Kale and young Jenkins set out before the sun crested the hills. The journey to Lewiston was uneventful, save for Jenkins' constant chattering about his sweetheart back east. Kale let the words wash over him, occasionally grunting in acknowledgement. He had long ago accepted that his life would be one of solitude. Cowboys didn't make good husbands, and the few women who ventured this far west were looking for stability, not a man who spent months at a time following herds across endless grasslands. They reached Lewiston by nightfall of the second day. The small settlement was a hub for travelers and traders, its single street lined with establishments catering to those passing through. After securing rooms at the boarding house, Kale left Jenkins to his own devices and headed to the saloon. One whiskey before sleep, that was his ritual whenever he made it to town. The Golden Eagle Saloon was crowded, filled with the usual mix of cowboys, miners, and drifters. Kale found a spot at the bar and ordered his drink, content to observe the room in silence. That's when he heard a voice that cut through the cacophony like a beam of pure light. On a small stage in the corner, a woman was singing. Her dark hair fell in waves down her back, and her blue dress, though simple, complemented the paleness of her skin. But it was her voice that held him transfixed. Clear and true, it seemed to reach inside his chest and touch something he thought long buried. "Who is she?" Kale asked the bartender, unable to tear his eyes away. "New girl, came in on the stage from Wyoming last week. Name's Bridget. Ned hired her to sing 3 nights a week. Brings in good business." Kale nodded, understanding completely why men would flock to hear such a voice. It wasn't just beautiful. It was honest in a way few things in this harsh land ever were. When she finished her song, the room erupted in applause. Kale watched as she smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from pretty to radiant. As the next song began, he found himself moving closer to the stage, drawn by some force he couldn't name. Bridget noticed the tall cowboy approaching. Unlike the other men who watched her with obvious desire or drunken appreciation, his gaze was different, almost reverent. She had seen this reaction before, but usually it was followed by fear or suspicion. In his eyes, she saw only wonder. After her set ended, Bridget made her way to the small dressing room in the back of the saloon. She had been fortunate to find work so quickly after arriving in Lewiston. Ned, the saloon owner, had heard her humming while she inquired about a room and immediately offered her a position. "That voice'll fill my place every night," he had said, and so far he'd been right. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Grayson?" a deep voice called. Bridget hesitated. She'd already refused several gentlemen who thought her singing came with other services. "Who is it?" "Kale Walker, madam. I just wanted to say your singing was the finest thing I've heard in all my years out west." Something in his tone made Bridget open the door a crack. The tall cowboy stood there, hat in hand, looking almost boyishly nervous despite his imposing frame. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. I'm glad you enjoyed it." "I didn't just enjoy it, madam. It was like hearing something I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." He flushed slightly at his own words. "I apologize if that sounds foolish." Bridget opened the door wider, intrigued by this plain-spoken man. "Not foolish at all. Music speaks differently to each person. Might I walk you to your lodgings? These streets can be rough after dark." In another time, Bridget might have refused. But something about Kale Walker's earnest expression made her nod. "I'd appreciate that. Let me gather my things." As they walked through the dusty streets of Lewiston, Kale kept a respectful distance. The night air was cool and stars blanketed the vast Montana sky. "How long have you been singing?" Kale asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "All my life," Bridget replied. "Though not always for audiences. Until recently it was just for myself." "What changed?" Bridget hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I left my hometown rather suddenly. Singing in saloons wasn't my first choice, but it turns out people will pay to hear what got me cast out in the first place." Kale's brow furrowed. "Cast out? For singing?" "For having a voice that made people uncomfortable. They said it was unnatural, bewitching." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "In Willow Creek, that's reason enough to drive someone away." Kale shook his head, genuine confusion on his face. "That's the most fool thing I ever heard. Your voice is a gift, plain and simple." They reached the boarding house where Bridget was staying. She turned to face him, studying his weathered features in the moonlight. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Walker." "Kale, please." "Kale," she smiled. "Will you be in Lewiston long?" "Just until tomorrow afternoon. I'm escorting supplies back to Silverhorn Ranch." Disappointment flickered through Bridget, surprising her with its intensity. "Then I'm glad you had a chance to hear me sing tonight. I'll be back," Kale said, determination in his voice. "Month's end latest. The ranch always needs supplies." Bridget felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I sing Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. I'll remember that." He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it slightly. "Good night, Miss Grayson." "Bridget," she corrected. "Good night, Kale." As promised, Kale returned to Lewiston at the end of the month, and the month after that. Each visit, he would sit at the same table near the stage, nursing a single whiskey throughout Bridget's entire performance. Afterward, he would walk her to her boarding house, their conversations growing longer and more personal with each encounter. Bridget learned that Kale had come west as a boy of 15, following his father's restless spirit after his mother's death. He'd worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, seen the vast expanse of the American frontier, and finally found a home of sorts at Silverhorn. Kale, in turn, discovered that Bridget was the daughter of a blacksmith and a schoolteacher, that she could read Shakespeare and do sums in her head, and that the songs she sang most beautifully were the ones she wrote herself, though she was too shy to admit they were her creation to the saloon patrons. By the 4th month of their acquaintance, something undeniable had grown between them. It was a cool September evening when Kale finally gathered his courage. "I've been thinking," he said as they walked slowly through town, deliberately extending their time together. "The Silverhorn's a good outfit, but there's land available near Bitterroot Valley. Good grazing land. A man could start his own ranch there, build something lasting." Bridget's heart quickened. "That sounds like a fine ambition. It would need to be more than a dream, though." "It would need to be a home." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "A home needs more than walls and a roof. It needs heart." "Kale Walker, are you asking me something?" Bridget's voice was barely above a whisper. "I reckon I am, though I'm making a mess of it." He took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but out here, life doesn't wait. I've never met anyone like you, Bridget. Your voice was what first caught me, but it's your spirit that holds me. I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Tears sprang to Bridget's eyes. "But what about my singing? Many men say they don't mind a performing wife until after the vows are spoken." "Your voice is the only song I ever want to hear," Kale said firmly. "I'd never ask you to silence it. That would be like asking the birds not to welcome the dawn or the wind not to whisper through the pines." Bridget felt as though her heart might burst. After being cast out for the very thing that made her who she was, here was a man who not only accepted her voice but cherished it. "Yes," she said, her own voice strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you, Kale Walker." Their wedding was a simple affair in Lewiston's small church. Jenkins stood as Kale's best man while Ned's wife, Martha, attended Bridget. The town had come to embrace the singer with the extraordinary voice, and many residents filled the pews to witness the union. After the ceremony, they held a celebration at the Golden Eagle, where Bridget sang not for payment but for joy. Kale watched his new wife with undisguised adoration, still amazed that this remarkable woman had agreed to share his life. Later that night, as they prepared to depart for the small cabin, Kale had purchased on the outskirts of town a temporary home until they could establish their ranch. Ned approached them with a wrapped package. "Wedding present," he said gruffly, thrusting it into Bridget's hands. "From Martha and me." Inside was a beautiful silver locket. When Bridget opened it, instead of space for portraits, there was a tiny music box mechanism that played a sweet, tinkling melody. "So you always have music with you," Martha explained, "even when you're not singing." Bridget embraced the woman, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything, for giving me a place when I had none. You made your own place, girl. That voice of yours opened doors. We just happened to have one of them." The first year of marriage brought both joy and hardship. Kale continued working at Silver Horn while saving every penny toward their own ranch. Bridget still sang at the Golden Eagle 3 nights a week, her popularity growing to the point that travelers would adjust their schedules to pass through Lewiston on nights she performed. They faced challenges too. The harsh Montana winter tested their resolve, with blizzards that trapped them in their small cabin for days. There were moments of doubt when the dream of their own land seemed impossibly distant, but through it all, there was music. Bridget's voice filled their humble home, turned mundane tasks into celebrations, and soothed Kale's weariness after long days of hard labor. In the evenings, she would often sit by the fire and compose new songs, with Kale offering suggestions or simply listening in appreciative silence. Spring brought unexpected news. Bridget was with child. The prospect of a baby added urgency to their plans, but also deepened their commitment to building a future together. "We'll need to move faster on the ranch," Kale said one evening, his hand resting gently on Bridget's still flat stomach. "A baby needs roots, stability." "We'll manage," Bridget assured him. "I can still sing for a few more months. We're already halfway to what we need." What neither of them anticipated was how word of the singing angel of Lewiston would spread. A passing journalist had heard Bridget perform and written a glowing account for a Helena newspaper. The article caught the attention of a wealthy cattle baron named Harrington, who made a special trip to Lewiston to hear the famous voice for himself. After her performance, he approached their table. "Mrs. Walker," he said, tipping his expensive hat, "your reputation doesn't do you justice. I have a proposition for you both." The proposition was unexpected but intriguing. Harrington owned vast tracts of land, including a parcel in the Bitterroot Valley that he was willing to sell to them at a fair price, with generous terms. In exchange, he wanted Bridget to sing at his daughter's wedding in Helena and at occasional gatherings afterward. "My Eliza is getting married this summer," he explained. "She read that article about you and hasn't stopped talking about having you sing at her wedding. I'd consider it a personal favor, and I reward favors handsomely." Kale and Bridget exchanged glances. This could be the opportunity they'd been waiting for. "We'd need to see the land first," Kale said cautiously, "and understand exactly what commitments you're expecting from my wife. Of course, 3 or 4 performances a year at most, all in Helena, all with proper accommodations and escort." "I'm not asking her to tour mining camps," Harrington smiled. "And you're welcome to inspect the property anytime. It's good land, Walker, the kind a man can build a legacy on." 2 weeks later, they stood on what could be their future homestead. The land was everything Harrington had promised: rolling hills perfect for grazing, a clear stream running through the property, fertile soil for crops, and timber for building. The existing structures needed work, but the bones were good: a sturdy main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. "What do you think?" Kale asked, watching Bridget's face carefully. She turned slowly, taking in the panoramic view of mountains in the distance, the vast open sky, the wildflowers dotting the grassland. Without warning, she began to sing a spontaneous melody that seemed to rise from the land itself, full of hope and possibility. When she finished, Kale's eyes were damp. "I take that as approval," Bridget laughed, the sound mingling with the breeze. "It's perfect, Kale. I can already see our children running across those fields, hear the cattle lowing in the distance." "Children, plural," he teased, wrapping his arms around her expanding waistline. "I have a feeling this little one will want brothers and sisters." She leaned back against his chest. "We'll call it Songbird Ranch." By summer's end, the property was theirs. The agreement with Harrington proved even more beneficial than anticipated. Not only did they secure favorable terms for the land, but his connections helped Kale acquire a small herd to start their operation. Bridget's performance at Eliza's wedding was met with such acclaim that several other wealthy families requested her talents, providing additional income as they established their ranch. They moved to the property in early autumn, racing against the coming winter to make necessary repairs and preparations. The work was exhausting, especially for Bridget in her advancing pregnancy, but the knowledge that they were building their own dream gave her strength. Word of their new venture spread through the territory, and to their surprise, help arrived in unexpected forms. Jenkins and 2 other cowboys from Silver Horn took leave to assist with final preparations before winter. Ned and Martha sent a wagon of supplies, including a beautiful cradle that Ned had crafted himself. Even some of the townsfolk from Lewiston made the journey to help, drawn by affection for the singer who had brought such joy to their community. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Songbird Ranch was ready to face the winter. The house was snug and warm, the cattle secured in protected pastures with ample feed stored in the barn, and the pantry stocked with preserved foods to last until spring. On a crisp December night, with snow blanketing the land in pristine white, Bridget went into labor. The nearest doctor was in Helena, 2 days' journey in good weather, impossible in the current conditions. Fortunately, among those who had come to help was an elderly woman named Ruth who had served as midwife for many frontier births. Kale paced anxiously outside the bedroom as Bridget's labor progressed. Each cry that escaped the room was like a physical blow. The man who could face down stampeding cattle and hostile elements felt utterly helpless before the mystery of birth. "Sing, Bridget," Ruth encouraged inside the bedroom. "Use that voice of yours to help bring your baby into the world." And so Bridget sang through pain, through fear, through the most demanding physical ordeal of her life. She sang lullabies her mother had taught her, hymns that had filled her childhood church, and finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, a new melody that came from some deep, primal place within her. With that last, powerful song, her daughter entered the world, her first cry joining her mother's voice in perfect harmony. When Kale was finally allowed into the room, he found Bridget cradling a tiny bundle with dark hair and pink cheeks. The look of absolute wonder on his face was one Bridget would remember all her days. "Meet your daughter," she said softly, passing the swaddled infant to his trembling hands. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "What shall we call her?" "Melody," Bridget replied without hesitation. "Melody Faith Walker." In the years that followed, Songbird Ranch flourished. Kale's knowledge of cattle and Bridget's unexpected head for business proved a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality that spread throughout the territory. Melody was joined by brothers Kyle and Benjamin, and later by another sister, Harmony. The Walker children grew up surrounded by music. Bridget's voice remained as clear and powerful as ever, and she taught each child to sing and play the piano they'd purchased after a particularly profitable year. Kale never tired of listening to his wife's voice. Whether she was performing for Montana's elite in Helena, singing their children to sleep, or simply humming while she worked around the ranch, her music remained the heartbeat of their home. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that the very gift that had once caused Bridget to be cast out had ultimately led her to the fullest, richest life she could imagine. Occasionally, travelers would pass through from Wyoming, bringing news of Willow Creek. The town had fallen on hard times. A series of poor harvests and a fire that destroyed half the businesses had left it struggling to survive. Some said it was divine punishment for their treatment of the singing witch. Bridget didn't believe in such superstitions, but she couldn't help feeling that justice had its own rhythm in this world. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kale surprised Bridget with a special gift, a small concert hall built on their property, with perfect acoustics designed by an architect from San Francisco. The elegant space seated 100 people and featured a magnificent piano on a raised stage. "What's this for?" Bridget asked, astonished as she walked through the beautiful room. "For your voice," Kale said simply. "So you never have to sing in smoky saloons again unless you choose to, so you can teach others, host musical gatherings, whatever you wish. Your voice deserves a proper home, just as you do." Bridget, now in her early 40s and still as vibrant as the day they met, threw her arms around her husband. "You've always heard me, truly heard me when no one else could." "Your voice was the only song I needed to hear," Kale replied, echoing words spoken long ago. "It led me to everything good in my life." The first concert in the new hall featured not just Bridget, but all 4 Walker children, their voices blending in harmony that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. Among the audience were old friends Jenkins, now foreman of his own ranch, Ned and Martha, gray-haired but still spirited, Ruth, stooped with age but beaming with pride at the family she'd helped bring into the world. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated the hall, Bridget stood alone on the stage for the final song of the evening. It was a piece she had composed herself, telling the story of a woman cast out for her voice who found, in that same voice, her true home. As the last note faded, Kale was the first on his feet, leading the standing ovation that followed. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, everything between them was said without words. The gratitude for finding each other, the pride in what they'd built together, the enduring love that had only deepened with each passing year. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their home watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky, Bridget leaned against her husband's solid shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking a chance on a saloon singer with nowhere else to go?" Kale turned to face her, taking her hands in his as he had done so many years ago in Lewiston. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His dark hair was now streaked with silver, but his gaze held the same wonder it had the first time he heard her sing. "Regret finding the other half of my soul." "Never." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your voice called to something in me I didn't know was there, Bridget. It woke me up, made me whole." "And you gave my voice a place to belong," she replied, her words almost a song themselves. "When the whole world wanted to silence me, you asked me to sing louder." Around them, the night was filled with the sounds of their land, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of wind through tall grass, the occasional hoot of an owl. But underneath it all was the music they had created together, a harmony of lives intertwined, of dreams realized, of love that had transformed them both. In the distance, lights glowed in the windows of the concert hall, a beacon in the darkness. Tomorrow, students would arrive for lessons, travelers would stop to hear the famous voice of Songbird Ranch, and life would continue its steady rhythm. But for now, in this perfect moment, Bridget sang softly for an audience of one, the man who had heard in her voice not a threat or a curse, but the most beautiful song in the world. And as always, Kale listened, his heart full beyond measure, grateful beyond words that of all the melodies in the vast, wild West, hers was the only song he would ever need to hear.